Hello everyone, welcome to the Lung Lang Show, and today is an International Women's Day, the 8th of March 2023. And here I am presenting three beautiful women from Nagaland, and they have been working for women issues in different capacities. So here we have Dr. Theyiesinuo Keditsu, and she is teaching in Kohima College in the English Literature Department. So thanks for joining for this conversation. And we have Gracy Ayee, and she's the state coordinator for State Hub for Women, Empowerment of Women under the Social Welfare Department. So, and she has worked for women issues for more than 10 years in the state government. So it's a privilege to have her here. And thirdly, we have Levino Yhoshü, and she is a researcher doing her PhD studies. So thanks all of you for joining me for this conversation. And we all know the fact that in Nagaland or in the context of Naga society, we have, when we look at women, we know that women are not truly empowered as we desire. So we want to understand this better from the perspective of a very educated women like you all. So to begin with, Gracy, can you also brief us how the current status of our women look like in terms of empowerment in Naga society?
If we have to really determine the status of women in the development sector, we look at the social status, the economic and the political aspect. In the political sphere, I think it's a noteworthy thing and a moment to celebrate that we have, after 60 years, we have 2 women in the state assembly representatives, but anyway, that is only 3.33% out of the 60. That's a different thing altogether. Right. So that is a small achievement, but a very significant one. Socially, we all celebrate the fact that, example, education, status of education, where the literacy level of boys and girls are also equally quite high. But at the same time, we don't really look at the level, the dropout level, example, the employment, the women at workforce, or for that matter, the vulnerability associated when they work with women. And when we're looking at social status, we're at a larger context, we also look at education is one, as I mentioned, the health sector, the sanitation, the violence against women, and other detrimental factors that hinders their development. And at the economic aspect, yes, we see many women participating to some extent, but then many women are still not financially dependent. And in fact, that is, which I'll progress and then share later on, is one of the results why many women choose to stay in abusive relationships based on the cases that we have got.
Oh, that's interesting. But as per your understanding, Theyi, like what Gracy has said, socially, still women are below the status of men, generally. So what is your analysis in the Naga society on that? Like, are women really, how bad it is, as per your analysis, given the current situation?
I don't know about bad, but the thing is, as long as we are a patriarchy, women will always have a sort of subordinate role. So patriarchy, as long as patriarchy exists, women will be subordinate, whether it's in terms of power, whether it's in terms of access to resources, whether it's in terms of just agency, personal agency.
Okay. For the common understanding of our viewers, can you tell us in brief or in simple term, what is patriarchy in the context of Naga society?
In the context of Naga society and in general, patriarchy is a social system. It's a sort of way of it's a way of structuring reality where men are given more power and more authority than women. It's as simple as that, just by virtue of them being men. So we speak of something called sexism. I think my best definition of patriarchy, my favorite definition, is given by bell hooks, who simply breaks down patriarchy as sexism. Just based on your identity as a man, you are able to access certain resources, you have more authority over women, and women based on their identity as women. based on their sex are disadvantaged, discriminated, or disenfranchised. So that is my favorite definition of patriarchy.
Thanks for the two of you for laying out that very clearly. Also, looking at the Naga society is predominantly constituted by the Christians, let's say the Christian religion. So, Levino, when you look at the church plays a crucial role in Naga society. How about the status of women in a church organizations, like in the religious sector, let's say that way?
I can only speak from my experience and from the church that I've grown up in. And when it comes to the issue of women in leadership, I think when it comes to empowerment in the church setting, it comes to women in leadership, in ministry leadership. I think it's not easy to describe the status of women in church as a whole, because I think even among Nagas, tribe-wise, there are tribes who have recognized women in leadership, even in the position of a pastor, and who have even, gotten ordination. But in some churches, we're still struggling to recognize that and to empower them in that sense. So it's not a blanket or, this is what the status of women is in Naga society, in the church. I think it depends on where you come from. So it's a little varied.
Right.
Yeah.
But will I be wrong to say that even in the church sector, women are still below the status of men?
Generally,
would I be wrong? Okay.
Generally, yes. Status-wise, if from a theological perspective, I think status-wise, no Christian would say that women are of lesser worth or value or status.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to leadership, and the case of ascribing authority for women to perform functions in different roles in the leadership, in different leadership roles, I think generally yes, they are a little below in the hierarchy. Yeah.
Because I think I can say some things that maybe she may not be able to say, but I think it also boils down to lazy Christians. I think when you have people who are not willing to engage with the Bible in very sort of responsible terms, you have very superficial readings of the Bible. You have people who take random passages from the Bible, which are very much, if read out of context, they're very sexist. There are verses in the Bible that forbid women from, taking part in church leadership and all of that. So we do have Christians who are lazy, who take verses like that and use that as to justify denying women power and participation in church leadership.
That's amazing.
When we're at that, I don't know if we'll be coming back to this topic, but when you're in that, I think I agree with her, that most often people who are against women in leadership positions in the church, if you really ask them how they can justify their positions, they are usually people who hear other people say certain things or who have, heard someone else say something. If you really ask them, they have not really done their homework in reading the Bible, reading the gaps in the Bible, and really understanding how, for example, Jesus or Paul, who are, the ideals of, for us Christians, actually recognized women and their abilities and how women participated in their ministry, in their time, in their culture. It was actually very subversive and very revolutionary, but like Thea said, most often she puts it as lazy Christians. It's more or less, that is the cause for misunderstanding and misconceptions.
Great. Now we are arriving into a perspective that in almost all spheres of Naga society, there is some sort of like women enjoying the lower status than men, right?
Not
enjoying in a sense, and enjoying doesn't necessarily mean like going through with fun. It's like it's a word of expression to say how women are going through. Let's say that way. That women are going through and some sort of a lower status than men, like in social, economic, even in the religious sector. But where do you think all this started, the idea of patriarchy in Naga society? Because Theyi has mentioned about Naga is a highly patriarchal society. Or I would say highly is added by me, but it's a patriarchal society. So where did you think it's all start, as per your understanding?
Ours was always, patrilineal, patriarchal, and also if you look at the customary system, the governing system, the chieftainship system, there are public spaces women were not visible. Okay, and so when you unintentionally mention enjoy, sometimes many women, they internalize it, not even realizing that they're subordinated or subjugated. That's one point. And men themselves don't even realize that there is discrimination. In fact, in so many public meetings, I've had male leaders in the civil society and other sectors also saying that discrimination and all this whatever welfare schemes that has come is not relevant in Nagaland because our women are empowered and they are comparing it with the national the status of women in India, where sati and dowry or whatever is practiced. But we cannot even compare because culturally we are very different. Right. But it is there. Ours was always a patriarchal and a patrilineal society, and it was, as far as I know, it was always there. And then, unfortunately, it is still visible in our own homes, in the public spaces, in the private spaces, everywhere we go.
Okay. Now. Okay, I want to drawing from that what she stated. I think before I go on to that, I want my audience to also know that these are very, very powerfully empowered women, so I have to be also very careful. Anyway, so now when we look at the Hindu society, or let's say some parts of India, when it comes to women, they are worse than Naga society, right? So men take this as an excuse for men to just say, hey, our women are treated very well with love and with respect. So where is the women being treated lower than men? Because when you mentioned about sati and all of mistreatment against women in other society. So men from Naga society end up or normally have the tendency to compare with sati practice and the women group, the women status in the, let's say, ancient or until today Hindu society, right? So when we look at it, men always end up comparing that way. So do you have any comment on that? What is your reaction to that?
I would be very careful. I wouldn't say that it's just Hindu society. I would, I think the safer and sort of more just term would be to say maybe mainland Indian society, which is also very different from, Adivasi and indigenous communities in the mainland. But we're very different. I think, and of course, we need to understand that, our understanding, we also have inherited or internalized a bit of our colonial snobbery. So, by virtue of conversion and so many other things, so this idea that, we don't do sati is sort of such a colonial hang-up because they also don't do sati anymore, I don't think, And actually you have really amazing modern, constitutional legislations that actually allow incredible freedoms to women in the mainland now that we still do not enjoy. I think one of the key aspects that Gracy highlighted was patrilineal. And I think one of the reasons for the disempowerment or the continued refusal to empower women beyond where we are right now has a material basis because, money matters. And so when we're talking about patrilineal, we're actually talking about inheritance rights. We're talking about property, we're talking about wealth. We're talking about wealth of families that, confer status, identity to people, here in Nagaland as elsewhere. So it begins to matter, for any community to be able to secure their wealth and their property onto people who identify and represent their sort of values, even up to race, things like this. I'm saying this also because I'm not married to a Naga. So, as a woman not married to a Naga, these are issues that we have to explore. And there's so many Nagas who are mixed and many other things. And even if you're intertribal mixed, these things matter. Mm-hmm. So, whereas in the mainland now, thanks to constitutional, legislation, your stereotypical, sort of Indian woman can now inherit the property of her father, regardless of who or whom she marries or what her status is. This is not true for us. So this idea that they are worse off than us is something that I would like to contest highly. Okay. We have female infanticide, which is documented in the mainland and is rampant in many parts of India, which may not be documented here, but that's not to say it doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. And even if there may not be sort of very alarming rates of female and infanticide, there's a great deal of mental torture, societal, communal, torture that happens to women who birth only girls and don't have sons. Mm-hmm. And all of this ties back to the material aspect of patrilineal.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. I think it's getting very clear that, let's say, I would say, oppression, or in terms of having to have this lower status than men, is high. It's very, very much existent, and it's quite prevailing even in Naga society. Although it becomes very invisible or subtle in the eyes of men, as per our conversation, right?
And women.
And women.
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
I agree.
Okay, perfect. Then let's keep that for now. Let's keep that away for now. Women don't realize that they are being oppressed. That means, right?
I think
some of the women, I mean.
I think many women oppress.
Yeah.
It's not just that they don't realize they are being oppressed.
They oppress themselves.
They oppress each other. They
Wow.
oppress men who do not want to oppress women.
Oh, really?
Because I don't think all men oppress
Okay,
women.
okay.
There are men who do not oppress women, and there are women who oppress women. And there are women who oppress those men who do not want to oppress women anymore. Mm-hmm. So it's not a male-female issue.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So the both gender are playing the same, equally playing the same role, right?
Patriarchy transcends sex.
Okay.
It's a system.
Mm-hmm. So that could be happening out of ignorance at the same time. It could be out of deliberate
social conditioning.
Social conditioning.
And vested interest.
Okay.
Yeah, and if I could just add a little
Please.
bit, the same point, but so when you're talking about empowerment, and so I think one of the things was to discuss or define what empowerment really is.
Yes, let's do that.
That might come in the end, but
we can
when
take
we're
forward
in
now.
this,
Yeah.
I think empowerment has to come from all sections of society, depending on. I'm not saying I have the definition of what empowerment is, but depending on what you think or how you define empowerment, most of the time it's women who don't support women. Yeah. So that's a very important point, and that's what I discovered to my surprise as a researcher. That it's usually not usually, but sometimes, or maybe even usually, women who. Don't support each other.
Those are amazing perspectives, I'm sure many will not think in detail on this thing as deep as like you guys do. Because people who have faced this problem think more or deeper than people who have not faced the problem of this, right? So my point is now, Gracy, having worked with the state government project for women empowerment, or being the state coordinator for state hub for empowerment of women, what is women empowerment like? Can you give us that ideal scenario of where women are empowered?
I think definition, you can Google search everything academic, you'll find it. Yeah. But when we're talking about empowerment, we're talking about socially disadvantaged group is the woman, and we are talking about changing the condition improving the condition and the position of the woman in the three parameters that I mentioned earlier: social, economic, and political. And when I say political, one, of course, we are celebrating at the state level, but we should, the maximum, 70% of us live in rural part of Nagaland, and at the grassroots, we have the village development boards and different systems. When we're talking about women in the decision-making process, and that is the political aspect of it, the participation of women is I would say, they are just secondary actors. As we must have seen in most meetings, that women are confined to doing conventional role, even though they are official, as per the VDP Act, 1/4 of them is supposed to be a woman, and that is something, in the policy, and it's a celebrated thing. But in reality, in my own locality, in my own villages, women are confined to doing the conventional work. And sometimes it happens that in the general meeting, men are seated there, mostly men are seated there, and then discussing about village affairs and the development affairs, and women are not visible. Why? They're busy cooking for the male members who are seated there. Okay, so that is one. And then again, in the economic aspect of it, we were earlier talking about oppression, and the classic example I would like to state, because we work extensively with women affected by violence. So example of a victim who is affected by domestic violence, okay, not is an example, but based on real life, she is unable to move out of that oppressive relationship, and that oppression, as Thea rightly mentioned, is sometimes not just the husband, it is also the in-laws, the mother-in-laws and the sister-in-laws, and family gets involved in the whole system, and she is unable to move out of that social relation there, because she is not economically empowered, right? And then now imagine this woman, okay, who is not empowered within home. How will she go and participate in the decision-making process at the social level? So it's intrinsic, and it is based on the experiences that we have in the number of cases. Maximum out of one-stop centers, where we have in 11 districts now, and we have Women Helpline 181, where women in distress can call. Over the past 4-5 years, we have received about 1,000 cases related to women affected by violence.
I think education plays a vital role, at least from the standpoint of a woman. Unless you're educated, and when it comes to women empowerment, I think self-confidence is very important. And given the state of affairs that we are in, the Naga society, and we've talked about the prevalence of Christianity. With Christianity came education, and with education came a certain sense of status and respect that we give, to, and whether we like it or not, whether we identify it or not, or whether we recognize it or not, I think we all, either consciously or unconsciously, ascribe some kind of status to educated people. That's just natural for Nagas. So even when we're talking about women empowerment, I think education is very important. Of course, first for the rest of society to be educated on issues such as this, but also women to be educated enough to be confident and to have the vocabulary to articulate what they think is right, what they think should be. And of course, the judge of that does not rest on us women. It doesn't stop at that, but education is vital.
I agree with her totally that knowledge is power. What kind of knowledge, what kind of education is the question here, basically. So educated women may be literate and whatnot, but maybe you're not sensitized enough. Maybe you are not empowered enough to exercise your agency.
Okay, education then, according to what you say, education doesn't mean necessarily
that you're sensitized.
The degree and academics that we have, right? It's about sensitization, moral sensitization.
And also, I wanted to add this. Education in the sense of, again, given the society that we are in, there's traditional values still persist. And no matter how much we try to suppress or we sort of almost look at them as regressive, it is there, and I think we need them to assert ourselves as Nagas, in whatever aspect or whatever field, or even as to assert a unique identity. That's one of the things that we are all striving for, I think, in our different understanding of what that is. But education of tradition is also very important, because, again, in my own experience of studying women, I think respect and empowerment is ascribed most of the time. You don't really
You don't really teach.
You can really grab it from someone. It's ascribed to you.
Okay.
And for us as a society, we still respect tradition a lot.
Right.
And so women also need to know what is expected of them. And again, that the how much we are able to or choose to meet those expectations is again very, very subjective. But we need to be educated on tradition too. And I think as much as we're, even I don't know Gracie so well, but Theye, I think I can say that she has been able to navigate that very, very, very well. She speaks the language of the contemporary language, but very diplomatically. I can say, wearing a mekhala.
Okay.
So I think we need to be educated on tradition too and what it expects from women.
So to navigate.
Discard that. Yeah.
Okay, that's I think articulated. Now to navigate this conversation further, I would say there's a connotation that empowered women are like kind of hard to talk to. I mean, the idea of feminism, which the connotation, negative connotation that it comes with it. I'm sure you all will agree with that. How do you tell the men folk that empowered women are not threatening to your existence? Rather, or I want to see your opinion as rather, should men be concerned about the over-dominance of women when they're really empowered?
May I take this question,
Please,
if you don't mind? Because again, I just want to reiterate, it's not a man-woman issue.
Yes, absolutely.
There are women who are afraid to talk to me because I'm a feminist, and there are men who want to talk to me because I'm a feminist, So it's not a man-woman issue. I think it just boils down to, okay, definitely, if we look at the history of feminism, it did go through a very sort of raging, angry phase, and that was very conveniently picked up upon by patriarchy and its supporters to demonize women and sort of anyway, even without the feminist movement, if you look at the history of the world, women have been demonized, persecuted just by virtue of their sex. So it's not like feminism, did something different. It was just, another log in the burning, fire. So, but having said that, as a feminist, this is my project. I identify as an indigenous feminist, I'm also in a sort of negotiating indigenous feminism and post-feminism, etc. But my project, and I think among many men and women who either openly identify as feminists or who are feminists, even if they don't want to admit it, we are trying to do feminism in a peaceful way. And I think that matters. But having said that, I think that fear of empowered women comes from a place of ignorance. So rather than, I think the only way to be able to mediate, that kind of fear and apprehension of empowered women, and maybe if they want to say feminists, is to simply enlighten and educate men and women.
Okay.
True.
I think that's really decoding the whole opinion, or how this is the perception of society about feminism and empowered women. Now, what I want to understand, again relating to this is, when it comes to empowerment of women, the role of women in society, or let's say the division of labor between men and women, plays a huge role. So does the division of labor change along the advancement or coming of women empowerment? Like,
You mean gender roles?
Yeah, gender roles,
No, really, we're talking about gender equality, we're talking about women empowerment, we're talking about shared responsibility.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to give I think we are getting very theoretical here, but just to give an example, a woman who goes to office or somebody who works is expected to come back and do the same household chores, but a man will finish that 10 to 5 job and then you're chilled, you know. So where is the space for a woman to even go to the public space because you are overburdened with household responsibilities? I mean, I'm putting it as simply as that, okay? So yes, when we are talking about gender equality, we are talking about sharing the responsibilities equally, both in the public sphere, in the private sphere, and I think when that's done, as we've always been, discussing already, that it begins at home. I think that's a classic example that I would like to cite here.
I think, what Levino had said much earlier, but one thing that we need to remember is, we Nagas, we are patriarchal, but we have many different kinds of patriarchy. So even within our tribes, our patriarchies are very varied. And even within a single tribe, depending on the village, you have some villages that are known for being very patriarchal, other loosely patriarchal, So there is a great diversity in the patriarchies that we have also. So I think that's something that we must remember. Having said that, I actually want to appeal to our tradition. If you look at Naga tradition, it is very, very common for all patriarchal Naga cultures to have male participation in domestic and childcare, So we have a lot of carrying the child, working. This is done by men without any stigma. Cooking in the house is also done by most men. Domestic chores, affairs, these traditionally, this idea that, women were completely disempowered in the past, and modernity and education somehow brought us into, light, is highly, debatable. So if we look at our tradition, there are enough instances of men who participate in what in modern terms is perceived to be female labor space, Now, little controversial here, but in my research work, what I contend is actually this in a way has to do with us inheriting a certain kind of Christian culture. And here, without trying to be controversial, I just want to qualify. We need to make a differentiation between what is culturally Christian and what is Christian, So we have inherited two forms of Christianity. We have inherited the Bible, the gospel, this wonderful, miraculous, life-changing gospel, but we have also inherited a very specifically, evangelical 1920s, 30s prohibition Christian culture from the American Baptists. And now when you study that culture of Christian evangelicism, that is very regressive. It is, oppressively patriarchal, and it really distinguishes between the space of men and women. So this is something that we Nagas, if we want to decolonize ourselves even spiritually, we have to open our eyes and see that by rejecting a certain kind of Christian culture, we are not rejecting
the gospel,
the wonderful gospel.
Yes.
But we need to do that. And if we can do that, and if we can look at, and I'm not saying that tradition is also some kind of wonderful, utopia for women. I'm not saying that. Yes, there are many aspects in our traditional culture that, oppress women. But in terms of labor, division, sex-based division of labor, in my research, I have found that across tribes, there is definitely a great blurring. In fact, perhaps we can even argue that does a sexual division of labor exist? Whether it is in agricultural work, homework, except for literally birthing the child, we have, because if I'm not mistaken, this is what I was told, the tradition for us is that after we give birth, the husband, not the mother, the sister, the husband is the one who washes our the clothes from our labor. So imagine the beauty and the intimacy of that. So what I'm trying to say is, this idea that, all Naga men are chauvinist pigs. This is something I don't agree with. There are Naga men that, and across generations, I'm not just saying the younger guard, we have older men, fathers, grandfathers, who are really feminists in practice. They cook, they've taken care of us, they've cleaned us, they've watched over us without any threat to their masculinity, and are inheriting a certain kind of, foreign Western culture where that division of labor is very watertight, has actually been detrimental to, this sharing of labor.
Yeah, can I also add something to that? Not really talking about the same point that Thea is talking about, but when it comes to the evolving of attitudes and understanding of what should be, what should not be, or how. So for example, just because also Gracie mentioned about professional women, they come back home and they find this gender, these domestic roles exclusively set aside for them to sort of finish at the end of the day. Again, I can only speak based on what I have observed and what I've learned. So it seems to me that when 2 generations before me, now from my position, it'll be 2 generations before me. There were already working women, and most of them were evangelists or teachers. And in that culture of that day, these were acceptable professions for women. It doesn't seem like people had a problem with that because of, most probably because Christians, missionaries came and opened schools, and so women are participating in teaching in the schools, and evangelizing was accepted. But they did not seem to have a problem with juggling roles, domestic and professional, we can say, or work related, and because they were oblivious to, I think, narratives that we are aware of now. When we can talk about feminism or empowerment and all that. And then there's this generation again before me, which would be my mother's generation, who entered into fields which were not open or accessible for women. So we can see lots of women in all the fields, whether it's again, education is already still, I think, dominantly we have women teachers, but then it could be in civil service, it could be in the medical field. So women have entered into all these spaces, and at the same time, like I mentioned a bit, tradition persists. So cultural expectation still persists. So now they have to navigate this, this increasing conflict between their roles in their workplace and at home. And so the conflict increases, and at the same time, we see more seeping in of narratives from, I think for us, it'll be the West, on women empowerment, on equality. And so the conflict grows. And in our generation, I think we are aware of narratives that come from the second, third, fourth wave of feminism, where, feminism has become much more aggressive. And so, again, I think I'm just touching on lots of points that we've already discussed. So when we're talking about women empowerment, men also look at women empowerment as, as women who are trying to dominate and who are trying to, discard tradition, discard their domestic roles, and prioritize only, their dreams and aspirations and their professional requirements and demands. And so I think it's important to understand how this kind of attitudes and perspectives have evolved, and try to be a little more careful in forming opinions on issues like feminism, empowerment, or equality, because I think it's almost dangerous and destructive and very divisive if we are trying to define them as this, and and we start picturing women who are, us and them, us and them, and we start or for us women idealizing certain women as that is an independent woman, and society is in general sort of like Thea just mentioned, being dividing ourselves and looking at the other as the other and us, and as a threat to society.
The society. And from this conversation, I think what Thea has also mentioned, men are becoming more, how to say, mixed up with like the sharp division of gender roles between men and women has become kind of a blur, and it's blurry. So it's that even in the context of rural area, because I think from a just raw observation, what I would see, urban area could have been improved. I would agree with that, because the concept of nuclear family, the concept of like shared responsibility, as Gracy has mentioned, has emerged in the urban area more than the rural area. When you visit the rural area, you will see women taking care of kids, doing all the chores. Men will go to the field, do all the men work, come home. So are we avoiding or are we ignoring the elephant in the room by saying that men also now share more or less the same responsibility as women? Because I would like to contest on that idea for the fact that from my observation, I see many women still sticking to that chores as a, like you said, the women spaces or the female space. So how do we really take on this with,
I think you misunderstood me. What I'm saying is that sexual division of labor is actually something that was very blurred in traditional times. I'm not saying across the board, but in many parts, and even in rural areas now, if you go and see, men take part in child care. They do. They carry their kids, and there's some agricultural practices that necessitate only women will do it. So there's some crops, there are plants, or there's some certain cycles where only the women go and they do the field work. So who's taking care of the house and who's cooking? It's the men. So this idea that men only go and do only warfare, that much is understood. That in warfare it's the men who go and fight the war and the women who have to stay back. But as far as regular agricultural life, it's actually very participatory. It's actually so whether in the past or even now, this is a fact. Now, as far as the nuclear family, yes, it's a modern invention, and this is something that is beginning to insert itself even in our Naga society. And I think what Levino is saying, not just, I think when you were referring to family, you're not only talking about a nuclear family, sort of one of the most beautiful things about being indigenous people, us Nagas and all mostly indigenous people, community plays a very, very important role, so it need not be blood relatives, but just this idea that even now I live in this wonderful neighborhood called Choto Bosti. I know my house is safe, because I know my neighbors, and I know, if something is happening in my neighbor's house, I'm actually going to go and check, and I know my neighbors will do the same for me. Where people who, so it's not just blood relations. This idea of community, even whether it's childcare. Those days when we were naughty in the neighborhood, we would expect, a box in the ears from the neighborhood auntie or uncle. So it's, whether it is childcare, raising children, whether it's domestic work, this spirit of sharing, this spirit of, contributing labor, helping each other when we're in difficulty. This is something that is one of the most beautiful parts of being a Naga. And so that is something that we must hold on to. And I think one of the reasons why many of the nuclear families are struggling these days, especially those people who are not from these urban areas, is because they are not able to sort of create that community. And I think if we are able to, sort of demodernize ourselves a little bit and sort of return to, our community-based roots, these are problems that can take care of themselves.
With the coming of the modernization, I think we have become more individualistic rather than communitized.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you want your own space, I want my own space. I let's say 10 years back, I didn't mind sleeping in the same room with many people. Now I want my own space because there are many things that I don't want people to know what I'm doing, what I'm working on. That's a basic example. So I think instead of communitization increasing, I have the feeling that the individualization of the society will come even more stronger because of the modernization. But leaving that topic aside, I think on this topic we can go and talk and continue forever. However, I really want to also bring to some conclusion that in order to really bring this empowerment of women, like our general consensus and understanding is that it's a social issue. It's not the perception or wrong, misconception of men alone. Right?
Absolutely.
It's a society as a whole now. What do you think is the solution to bring this empowerment, actual empowerment of women, that society develops or society moves into this direction? What do we suggest? For example, we have talked about the political participation, do women getting elected, which is a good step, it's a milestone, right? But I still want to contest the idea that, see, it's not a decision that they made alone. It's supported by top echelons of politics, which is consisted of men. It's they handpicked these women to participate. I would see that women empowerment in politics has really come when women make that decision of picking whom to contest, who should contest and who should go. The basic example is Mamata Banerjee. Men cannot defeat her. No men decide for her, right? I want to bring that argument. The president of India, the BJP party picks her, right? And our MB, the BJP party picks her. But I'm not negating the whole positive points of that. Rather, I would say that it will be too soon to celebrate that this is what we want.
Of course,
we still have a long way to go to reach that top echelons of politics and to be able to make the decisions by the women themselves. So giving you that perspective, now how do we go about in order to bring this actual realization of women empowerment in our society? Open to anyone.
I'll just add from our cultural perspective, in a society or the different social, cultural and political institutions, which you have also mentioned some of them, the different tribal bodies that we have, the contemporary tribal apex bodies that we have. If you look at all these structures, including church, these are structurally created based on hierarchy. Men being at the top, women being playing the secondary role again. So we have example, the apex body of a tribal, all mostly men, and these days we have 1 or 2 women representative, and that's still the news headlines. So they decide for the larger good example, larger development of the tribe, but there is a smaller set of the women bodies, women group that takes care of only women issues. So in the larger social issues, you are still excluding women from discussing, the larger social issues. Why are we limiting the women issues only for women discussing women issues? Women issues, it's high time we start discussing it as a social issue. Right. Okay, I think that is at a larger cultural perspective, I think that is something that we must debate upon and then even change. Of course, as you rightly mentioned, the beginning has started. Women have started breaking many gender stereotypes in the field of politics now, sports, academics, even in different, administrative positions or different field. But still, there is a long way to go. And then, to begin with, one is starting at home, as we have discussed earlier. But other is also even questioning the different the institutions that we have placed in these contemporary times.
That's wonderful.
I am somebody who's very slow with accepting change, and I'd rather sit and observe and then act if I have the opportunity. So when it comes to women empowerment, I think for me it's very important to, while we recognize and attach equal value and worth to men and women, I think we also have to recognize the distinctive functions that only women can do. For example, giving birth to a child, or nurturing, which is again not gender exclusive. Many men are very good with children. I know of, even my husband, for that matter, is very good with children. And for example, I could be here because he's at home taking care of the children. Right. But then generally speaking, nurturing is again, mostly expected from the mother. And so these are things which are exclusive to women and what women are expected to do, but at the same time, what they can do best. And so I think empowerment also has to take into account things that make us different and not necessarily lesser because we are stuck with a baby for, if I give birth to a baby, I'm more or less at home with the baby, you know, nursing and taking care of the baby for several months at least. Yeah. So, but then recognizing that and attaching value to that, not just the society, but even the woman herself, recognizing that she and only she can do that, and not have an attitude of, you know, that of perceiving that as something that's lesser.
Yes.
But
yes,
you know,
absolutely.
I think we have to start from there, because if we keep denying that, then, you know, you can talk about empowerment till the cow comes home, but until you recognize that and attach value to that, more discussions and debate on empowerment and feminism would only lead to more anger and grievance, I think.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, I'm not saying that I've you know, received enlightenment or that I've, you know, but then I think I'm realizing that, you know, it has to start from there.
Yeah, so basically a woman can exercise her choice if she decides to be a full-time homemaker, and that's perfectly okay, you know. Yeah, equally significant. There is nothing lesser compared to a career-oriented woman.
I think it's a mindset problem.
Yeah.
To begin with, right? All this lower status of you know, having a lower status of women in society. Anyway, Theyi.
Yeah, so much to say.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, first is, you know, we need to start young. I think, you know, we need to accept that, you know, there are certain people that have gone past the point of no return. So forget our efforts for that, you know, just pray for them and, you know, let them do their thing. But as an educator and as a mother, you know, I think it's very important for us to now focus on the next generation, on
Very
young
true.
people. So I'm not just talking about kids. No, for even up to college level, it's possible for us to, you know, sort of influence them, you know, change the way they think about the world. So I think our focus should be on young people, and I'm really excited about this program because I hope that more young people will watch it. It will change. Having said that, you know, at sort of the structural level, as a college teacher, not only speaking about my college, but, you know, sort of colleges in general, if you look, I just strongly feel that you need to blanket ban this position of women's secretary and assistant women's secretary. What in the world does that mean? You know, if you have a students' union, have a students' union, you know, elect officials. But by women's secretary, you're enacting at, you know, sort of a college level what is going to be, you know, sort of amplified at the broader social village, you know, political level, etc. In school also, from the sort of rough research I've done, I believe boys are always, in general, made captain and girls are made vice captain. So, you know, children are learning at a very young age that women cannot handle power or authority, or if a woman or a girl is given authority, nobody will listen to her. So if you're conditioning your children like this, and this is happening in Nagaland, in Naga schools, we need to change the way we think, you know. So let the boys struggle, even if they come from a completely male-dominated home. At least in school, if they start learning to, you know, look at authority outside of sex, because actually it doesn't matter whether it's a, I think somebody had said, when, you know, when they can envision 5 female Supreme Court, US Supreme Court judges, that is where, you know, it's done, the work is done. So in the same way, you know, just as we have been having 60 male MLAs all this while, you know, eventually, and by this I'm not trying to threaten any man or, you know, anybody's position, but eventually, how wonderful would it be if we had 60 women in the legislative assembly, just as we have had 60 men in the legislative assembly, you know, without anybody questioning this, you know, not because they are women, but just because they are people who are capable of, you know, running the state. And this is one of the reasons why I'm very opposed to reservation, because if we are talking about community-based reservation in India, maybe I understand if you start working out percentages, etc. But when you talk about gender-based reservation, and if reservation is supposed to sort of somehow correct for representation, men and women in the world, we are 50-50 though, no? In India, we're 50-50. In Nagaland, we're half-half, more or less. Half men and half women in the population. If you really want representation that, represents, reservation that represents representation, if you really want to do reservation for gender, for sex, then do 50-50. Otherwise, that sort of thing is, for me, it doesn't hold. And having said that, you were just mentioning our MLAs, our two current MLAs, how but as of now, I think it's not just about women choosing women, but it's also right now, in terms of who is choosing and who is allowing. And as of now, I think even in the debate on 33% reservation here in Nagaland with ULBs, I think one of the sort of strong requests that was done by, I will not say the male guard, but the patriarchal guard was, let us choose who it is. We will give the positions, but let us choose who it is. So this absolute fear that if women are given power without the approval or consent of men, somehow those women are not going to be able to handle it. They're going to lose, they're going to go wild and they're going to upset everything. That comes from what? That comes from a male class captain and a female vice captain. It begins from there. So we cannot expect men who have grown up in this system to suddenly be happy with women they have not chosen. And so if we want to change this current status quo, we need to begin from infancy, really. If a child is born and it happens to be male, celebrate. If that child is female, celebrate in the same measure. And if we can manage to do that, then we're on our way to changing how we see men and women.
I think we'll have, we can discuss this the whole time. I mean, for 2-3 hours, but due to the paucity of time, I think what I would like to draw here is, as Levino has also pointed out, that any task or any responsibility or role that women play should be equally valued and considered as a very significant. We have to value it as a society, and there's nothing as lesser status of work or the higher status of work. It's all man's creation, men's as in women, men.
Yeah.
Yes, and what Gracie says is also very, very correct, and I would really appreciate we adopting such that it's a whole cultural issue, right? It's not men and women, men versus men. It's a whole cultural issue that needs to be transformed in order to bring the idea of true women empowerment in our society. In Theyiesinuo correctly and mentioned that it's about how you start early in order to change, because people who have grown, who have lived their entire life eating and sleeping the same misconception of women status, let's say, I think they're not going to change for now because they are not able to understand what the society or what it is about, right? So I think we have to start this change, or in order to bring transformation, then it should start early, let's say from infancy or once they start going to school. So I think this is the general kind of a conclusion or a consensus or the lesson and takeaways, I would say, that we are, coming out from this discussion. And we have discussed a whole lot of varied points of areas. So I think it'll be nice to continue, maybe very soon, depending on the response of our audience as well. So I know you have a lot of things to say even now, but this has to cut short in order to make sure, we don't spend the whole time here. So thanks the three of you for specially joining on this conversation. And I hope with this discussion, I think our celebration of the International Naga Women's Day in Nagaland will be a very meaningful one. And thanks to your beautiful and amazing perspectives and opinion that you have shared, I think it's quite insightful. I personally have a lot of, your opinions have made me personally thought on a lot variety of issues. So thanks for this.
And let me add, we need more men like you joining this conversation.
Absolutely. I think
really
more conversations, more peaceful conversations like this, more intimate, and I really hope that whoever watches this, all of you start more discussions with people.
Yes.
We just need to keep talking.
We just need to do that. So thanks to the three of you once again for joining this, and we look forward to having you, the three of you or more very soon in days to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you.